Welcome to Sincere Stories. Today, I'll share a story. I always thought we could make it work. 20 years of marriage, a beautiful home, 2 grown kids, and a thriving business I built from scratch. At 55, I was at the peak of my career, and I thought I was at the peak of my marriage, too. Lisa and I had our ups and downs like any couple, but I never doubted her love for me. She was my rock, the one person who knew me inside and out. Or so I thought. Lately, things had changed. Lisa had become distant, like she was a million miles away even when she was sitting right next to me. She'd always been warm and affectionate, but now she felt cold, like there was a wall between us. At first, I thought it was stress. Her work was demanding, and I knew she'd been under a lot of pressure. But then, little things started to add up. She started staying late at work more often than usual. She'd come home, tired but somehow energized in a way that didn't sit right with me. She was spending more time working out, buying new clothes, and even expensive lingerie that I had never seen her wear for me. She mentioned new friends from work, people I'd never heard of before. And when I asked about them, she became defensive or evasive. I tried to brush it off. Maybe I was overthinking things. Maybe it was just a phase. But deep down, I felt that something was terribly wrong. I wanted to believe it was just my imagination, but the more I thought about it, the more I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something. One night, while she was in the shower, her phone lit up on the bedside table. I never usually checked her phone, but that night, something compelled me to look. And that's when I saw it. A message from someone named Tom with the words, "Can't wait for tomorrow night. It will be another unforgettable moment." My heart raced, my palms started to sweat. I tried to tell myself that it could mean anything, that it might not mean what I thought it did. But the anxiety gnawed at me. I needed to find out what was really going on. After reading that message, I felt a pit in my stomach, a kind of dread that I couldn't just shake off. I stared at her phone, debating whether to scroll up and read the entire conversation. But I stopped myself. What if I was wrong? What if Tom was just a friend or a colleague? I decided I needed more proof before jumping to conclusions. That night, I tried to act normal, but Lisa must have sensed something was off. She asked me if everything was okay, and I just smiled and said I was tired from work. She nodded and gave me a quick kiss on the cheek before heading to bed, but even that felt different, hollow, almost forced. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with questions. The next few days, I began to pay closer attention. I noticed how Lisa would carefully put her phone face down whenever I was around. She seemed to be more guarded, less open than before. Her late nights became more frequent, and her explanations grew vaguer. "Just another client meeting," she'd say, or "a girls' night out." But who were these girls? I'd never met any of them. Then there was her sudden interest in working out. She had always kept herself in good shape, but now it was like she was training for a marathon. Running early in the mornings, going to Pilates classes, and even joining a new gym that was a little too far away for convenience. And the lingerie, that was the biggest red flag. She bought sets of expensive, delicate lace pieces that I never saw her wear. Not for me, anyway. I wondered who they were really for. I tried to ignore the growing suspicions, but it was impossible. One night, I casually asked her if we could go out with some of her new friends. Her face went blank for a moment, and then she quickly recovered, saying they were all so busy or traveling a lot. The answer was flimsy, unconvincing. But I didn't press her. I didn't want to come off as paranoid. Instead, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I needed to know if there was more to this Tom than just a name on her phone. I started searching through our phone bills, looking for unfamiliar numbers. And there it was again, Tom's number, popping up more and more frequently over the last few months, usually late at night or during her supposed meetings. I felt a knot tighten in my chest. I wasn't just imagining things. Something was definitely happening. But I still needed to see it with my own eyes. I needed to catch them in the act. And so, I decided that the next time Lisa told me she had to stay late for work or meet a client, I would follow her. I knew it was risky. If she caught me, it could all blow up. But I had to know. I had to be sure. I couldn't live in this limbo, wondering if my wife was in love with someone else. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. A few nights later, Lisa mentioned she had a late client dinner. I watched her as she got ready, the way she meticulously did her makeup, taking extra time with her hair, slipping into a dress that hugged her curves just right. She looked stunning, like she was going on a first date. My stomach churned with a mix of anger and fear. I forced a smile and kissed her on the cheek, telling her to have a good night. The moment she left, I grabbed my car keys and waited a few minutes before following her. My heart was racing so fast I thought it might burst out of my chest. I tried to calm myself, repeating that I could still be wrong, that this could all just be a misunderstanding. But deep down, I knew better. I kept a safe distance, making sure she wouldn't spot me. She drove across town, not in the direction of any restaurant I knew she had clients at. My grip on the steering wheel tightened as I watched her pull into the parking lot of a fancy hotel. My breath caught in my throat. I parked a few cars away, carefully watching as she got out of the car. And that's when I saw him. A young man, maybe in his early 30s, waiting by the entrance. He looked eager. His face lit up when he saw her. They hugged, and he kissed her cheek, his hand lingering on her waist a little too long. I felt a hot wave of anger surge through me. I could see it in her eyes, the sparkle, the excitement. The look she used to give me. I felt my world starting to crumble, piece by piece. They exchanged a few words, laughing softly before he led her inside. I sat there for a moment, stunned, trying to decide what to do next. Should I confront them right now? 'Cause a scene in the lobby of a hotel? Or should I wait, try to find out more? I decided to wait. I wanted to be absolutely sure before I made a move. I got out of the car and, keeping my distance, followed them into the hotel. I stayed in the shadows, watching them check in at the front desk. My heart pounded in my ears, and every instinct in my body screamed at me to turn around, to walk away and pretend I hadn't seen any of this. But I couldn't. They took the elevator up, and I waited a minute before following. I didn't want to be seen. I needed to know what room they were going to. I watched the elevator numbers rise slowly, and then stop on the 6th floor. I took the stairs, 2 at a time, and reached the floor just in time to see them walking down the hallway, his arm around her waist, her hand playfully resting on his shoulder. They stopped in front of a door, and he leaned in to kiss her. I felt my stomach twist. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I didn't need to. I knew. I watched as they disappeared into the room, the door clicking shut behind them. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my legs trembling, my mind spinning. I leaned against the wall, trying to process what I had just seen. I couldn't breathe. My hands were shaking so badly I thought I might drop my phone as I dialed her number. It rang, once, twice, and then went to voicemail. I hung up without leaving a message. I was about to turn and leave when I heard it. Laughter. Her laugh, muffled through the door but unmistakable. And then a low voice, his voice, saying something I couldn't quite make out. My heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. I knew I should leave, but I couldn't move. I needed to know more. I needed to see it with my own eyes, no matter how much it hurt. I took a deep breath and crept closer to the door, pressing my ear against it. I heard soft whispers, the rustling of clothes, and then a moan. Lisa's moan. A sound I hadn't heard from her in months. I felt a tear roll down my cheek, my fists clenching so tight my knuckles turned white. This was it. This was really happening. I had been right all along. My wife was cheating on me, and I was standing outside the door, helpless, listening to every painful second of it. I stood outside that hotel room, my mind racing, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I couldn't just walk away, not after what I'd seen. Every instinct told me to barge in there, to catch them in the act, but I hesitated. I wasn't sure if I could handle seeing it with my own eyes. But I knew I needed to know. I needed to see it for myself, no matter how much it tore me apart. I took a few deep breaths, trying to steady my trembling hands, and then I started pacing the hallway. My thoughts were a jumbled mess, a mix of anger, hurt, and disbelief. How could she do this to me? After everything we'd been through, after all the years we'd spent together, how could she betray me like this? I replayed every moment in my mind, searching for signs I'd missed, clues that could have warned me. But I kept coming back to the same question: why? Why would she risk everything we had for some fling with a younger man? It didn't make sense, but then again, infidelity rarely does. It's selfish, cruel, and thoughtless. It rips apart lives, families, and everything you hold dear. And now, it was happening to me. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know for sure. I had to see it with my own eyes, even if it destroyed me. I walked back to the door, my heart pounding in my ears. I could hear faint sounds coming from inside, muffled voices, soft laughter, and then the unmistakable sound of a moan. Her moan. That was it. I couldn't stand outside any longer. I needed to know. I needed to see it, to confront her, to make her face what she was doing. I took a deep breath and reached for the door handle. My hand hovered there for a moment, shaking, as I tried to gather the courage to open it. But then I remembered that I didn't have a key. I couldn't just walk in. I needed a plan. I looked around, trying to think of what to do. My mind was spinning, but then an idea struck me. I'd seen a housekeeper's cart a few doors down. Maybe I could convince her to let me in, to pretend that I was locked out or that I needed something. It was a long shot, but it was all I had. I hurried down the hallway and found the housekeeper, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes. I put on my best desperate face and told her that I was locked out of my room, that my wife was inside but wasn't answering the door. I said it with enough urgency that she bought it, nodding sympathetically and offering to help. She walked me back to the door, pulled out a keycard, and slid it into the lock. The door clicked open, and I felt a rush of adrenaline. This was it. I was about to walk in on my wife with another man. I wasn't sure if I was ready for what I was about to see, but I knew there was no turning back now. The housekeeper gave me a concerned look as she handed me the keycard, but I forced a smile and thanked her. She left, and I stood there for a moment, my hand on the door, my heart racing. I pushed it open just a crack, peering inside. What I saw made my blood run cold. There they were, Lisa and Tom, tangled in the sheets, their bodies intertwined. The sight of them, naked and oblivious to the world, was like a punch to the gut. They were completely lost in each other, their faces flushed with passion. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me, my hands trembling as I gripped the doorframe. But I couldn't look away. I couldn't stop watching as my wife, the woman I had loved for 2 decades, moaned his name, her voice full of desire. I felt like I was in a nightmare, one that I couldn't wake up from. My entire world was shattering before my eyes, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I wanted to scream, to yell at them, to demand an explanation. But instead, I just stood there, frozen, my heart breaking into a million pieces. This was it. The truth I had been so desperate to uncover was now staring me in the face, and it was more painful than I could have ever imagined. I don't know how long I stood there, the door cracked just enough for me to see everything. Seconds? Minutes? It felt like hours. My heart was pounding in my ears, each beat like a hammer against my chest. I felt the world around me blur, my vision narrowing until all I could see was them, Lisa and this stranger, her new lover, wrapped around each other in our shared betrayal. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open wider, not caring anymore if they heard me. I needed them to know I was there. I needed them to see the damage they were doing. The door creaked, and the room's dim light spilled out into the hallway. Lisa froze mid-movement, her eyes wide as she turned her head to see me standing in the doorway. For a split second, there was shock on her face, then something else, fear? Guilt? It was hard to tell. But she didn't pull away from him. She didn't try to cover herself. Tom, the man she was with, didn't seem to register my presence at first. He was too caught up in the moment, his lips still on her neck, his hands gripping her hips tightly. It wasn't until he saw her reaction that he turned around, his face twisting from confusion to panic when he realized who I was. He scrambled back, grabbing the sheets to cover himself. "John!" Lisa gasped, but there was no shame in her voice, just a hint of irritation, like I had interrupted some private moment. "What are you doing here?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I wanted to yell, to scream at the top of my lungs, but all I could manage was a hoarse whisper. "What am I doing here? What the hell do you think you're doing?" She sighed, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of something cold and detached in her eyes. She glanced at Tom, then back at me, her face hardening. "John, listen, it's not what it looks like." I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that echoed around the room. "Not what it looks like? Really, Lisa? You're naked in bed with another man, and you want to tell me it's not what it looks like?" Tom stayed quiet, his face pale, as if he was unsure if he should jump in or wait for Lisa to handle it. I could see the fear in his eyes, the realization that he was about to get caught in something much bigger than he had bargained for. "John, please, calm down," Lisa said, still not bothering to cover herself. "Let's talk about this. I can explain." "Explain what?" I shouted, my voice finally breaking through the numbness. "Explain why my wife is screwing another man in some cheap hotel room? Explain why you've been lying to me, sneaking around behind my back?" She rolled her eyes, something I'd never seen her do before, like I was the one being unreasonable. "Because I'm tired, John. I'm tired of living this boring, predictable life with you. I need more excitement. More passion. Something you can't give me." Her words cut deeper than I could have imagined, like a knife twisting in my gut. "Something I can't give you?" I repeated, almost in disbelief. 20 years, Lisa. 20 goddamn years, and you couldn't even come to me, talk to me, tell me you felt this way? Would it have mattered? She shot back, her voice icy. "You're so wrapped up in your business, in your own little world. I've tried to tell you, but you never listen. You don't see me anymore." I felt a tear roll down my cheek, but I didn't bother wiping it away. I didn't care if they saw me break. "So, this is my fault?" I asked, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and pain. "You decided to sleep with him because I didn't pay enough attention to you?" Lisa shrugged, almost indifferent, as if this conversation were just an inconvenience, a minor bump in her plan. "Maybe," she said, her tone dismissive. "Or maybe I just wanted to feel alive again, John. Maybe I wanted to feel wanted." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was like I was talking to a stranger. Feel alive? Is that what this is? I pointed to Tom, who looked like he wished he could disappear into the sheets. "He makes you feel alive?" She didn't answer, just stared back at me, her expression hard. I turned to Tom, my fists clenched. "And you," I spat, "do you have any idea who I am? Do you know what you're doing? What you're breaking apart?" Tom finally spoke, his voice shaky. "Look, man, I didn't know. I didn't know it was like this." I laughed again, a wild, desperate sound. "Of course, you didn't know. You didn't care. You just saw an opportunity, didn't you?" Lisa sighed again, still so calm, so collected, it made my blood boil. "John, just go," she said softly, like she was trying to soothe a child throwing a tantrum. "There's nothing more to say. I've made my choice." That was it. I couldn't stand another second in that room, seeing them together, hearing her cold, heartless voice. I turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind me. The sound echoed down the hallway, a final, painful punctuation mark on everything I thought I knew. I could barely breathe, my chest tight, my head spinning. I stumbled back to my car, my legs weak, feeling like I was going to collapse. My entire life had just come crashing down in a single, excruciating moment. I leaned against the car, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my heart shattered into pieces too small to ever put back together. I had seen it. I had heard it. And now, there was no going back. I don't remember how I made it back home that night. The drive was a blur of headlights and tears, my mind replaying the image of them together over and over like some cruel, endless loop. When I walked through the door, our house felt foreign, like I was in a stranger's home. The walls that had once held our laughter, our memories, now seemed to close in on me, trapping me in this suffocating reality. I sat in the dark, waiting. I don't know why, but I needed to hear her say it again, to my face this time. Maybe a part of me was still hoping it was some awful mistake, that she'd walk through the door and tell me it was a misunderstanding, that I'd wake up from this nightmare. But deep down, I knew better. It was almost midnight when Lisa finally came home. I heard the key turn in the lock, the sound of her heels clicking against the floor. She walked in, flipping on the lights, and froze when she saw me sitting there, waiting. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Her face was flushed, her hair a mess, but there was no shame in her eyes. Just a flicker of surprise. "John," she started, but I cut her off. "Don't," I said, my voice cold and steady. "Don't you dare try to explain this away." She took a deep breath, crossing her arms defensively. "I'm not going to explain, John. I think we both know what this is." "What this is?" I echoed, feeling a fresh wave of anger surge through me. "This is you screwing another man, Lisa. This is you betraying everything we built together. 20 years, and you just throw it all away for what? For him?" She rolled her eyes, and I could see the irritation in her face. "You're not listening, John. I've been trying to tell you for months now, I'm not happy. I haven't been happy for a long time. And cheating was your solution?" I shot back. "Was that your great plan? To lie to me, to sneak around, and pretend everything was fine?" Lisa sighed, running a hand through her hair, looking more frustrated than guilty. "I didn't plan this, okay? It just happened. I didn't mean for it to get this far." "Get this far?" I laughed bitterly. "It got as far as you ending up naked in a hotel room with another man. How much further were you planning to take it?" She stayed silent for a moment, her face hardening. Then, she finally spoke, and her words were like ice. "I needed more, John. More than this boring, predictable life. I needed to feel alive again, to feel something real." "Real?" I nearly shouted, standing up, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. "You think that was real? That was nothing but sex, Lisa. Cheap, meaningless sex." She smirked, a cold, detached expression that I barely recognized. "And maybe that's all I needed. Maybe I just wanted to feel desired again, by someone who wasn't you." That hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt my breath catch, my heart breaking all over again. "So that's it?" I whispered. "You don't love me anymore?" She looked away, her expression unreadable. "I don't know, John. I don't know what I feel anymore." I could feel my anger boiling over, my hands trembling with the effort to keep from shouting. "You don't know?" I repeated. "You sure seemed to know what you wanted when you were in that hotel room with him." Her eyes snapped back to mine, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of emotion, anger, maybe, or guilt. "Fine," she said sharply, her voice rising. "Yes, I wanted it. I wanted him. I needed something, anything, to feel alive again. And what about us?" I demanded, my voice breaking. "What about everything we've been through, everything we've built together?" She shook her head slowly. "John, it's not about you. It's about me. I've changed, I've grown. And you've stayed the same. You're stuck in this routine, in your work, in your expectations." I felt trapped. "Trapped?" I repeated, disbelief and hurt mingling in my voice. "You felt trapped with me?" "Yes," she snapped. "I did. And I still do." I stared at her, feeling the final thread of hope slip away. "So what now?" I asked quietly. Are you going to leave me for him? Lisa sighed, her shoulders sagging. I don't know, John. I really don't. But I know I can't go on like this, pretending that everything's fine when it's not. I felt a lump rise in my throat, my voice barely a whisper. And what about us, Lisa? What about our life, our family? She didn't answer right away. She just looked at me with those cold, distant eyes, and I realized then that the woman I loved was gone. Replaced by someone I didn't know, someone who could stand there and tear my heart to pieces without a second thought. Finally, she spoke, her voice flat. Maybe there isn't an us anymore, John. Maybe it's time we both moved on. Her words were like a dagger to the heart. I felt a tear slip down my cheek, and I quickly wiped it away. Fine, I said, my voice breaking. If that's what you want, Lisa. If that's really what you want. She nodded, and I saw the tiniest hint of regret flicker in her eyes, but it was too little, too late. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her standing there, her face pale in the dim light. I knew then that this was the end. There was nothing left to save, nothing left to fight for. Just the cold, empty shell of what had once been our life together. I don't know how I made it through that night. After the confrontation, I stumbled into the guest room, my mind numb, my body drained of all energy. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, trying to process everything that had just happened. It felt like I was outside of myself, watching my life fall apart from a distance, unable to do anything to stop it. Lisa's words echoed in my mind, each one cutting deeper than the last. Asterisk, I don't know if I love you anymore. I felt trapped. Maybe there isn't an us anymore, asterisk, how had it come to this? How had we gone from 20 years of marriage to this? I tried to replay our last few months together, searching for signs, clues that could explain where things had gone wrong. I had been so caught up in my work, in providing for our family, that I hadn't noticed the cracks forming in our relationship. I had thought we were fine, that we were just going through a rough patch like all couples do. But clearly, I had been wrong. So horribly, painfully wrong. I lay down on the bed, staring up at the ceiling, my thoughts a chaotic mess. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them together, Lisa and that man, Tom, wrapped around each other, lost in their betrayal. The image was seared into my mind, haunting me, tormenting me. I felt like I was suffocating, like the walls were closing in on me, trapping me in this nightmare. I kept thinking about what Lisa had said, about how she felt trapped, bored, unfulfilled. Had I really failed her that badly? Had I become so distant, so focused on my work, that I hadn't noticed her slipping away? I had always thought I was doing the right thing, working hard, building our future, providing for our family. But maybe, in doing so, I had neglected the most important thing of all, our marriage. The guilt weighed heavily on me, crushing me under its weight. I started to blame myself for everything, convincing myself that if I had just been more attentive, more loving, more present, none of this would have happened. If I had just noticed the signs earlier, maybe I could have saved us. But then, a darker thought crept in. Maybe it wasn't entirely my fault. Maybe Lisa was just selfish. Maybe she had wanted an excuse, any excuse, to justify what she had done. To make it easier for her to walk away from everything we had built together. I didn't want to believe it, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. She had chosen to cheat, to lie, to betray me. That was her decision, not mine. And yet, despite everything, I still couldn't shake the feeling that I had failed her somehow. That I had failed us. Hours passed, and still, I couldn't sleep. The night dragged on, each minute stretching into an eternity. I felt like I was trapped in a waking nightmare, unable to escape the pain, the anger, the overwhelming sense of loss. I kept replaying the confrontation in my mind, wishing I had said something different, done something different. But it was too late now. The damage was done, and there was no going back. At some point, I must have drifted off, because I woke up to the faint light of dawn creeping through the curtains. My body felt heavy, exhausted, like I hadn't slept at all. I lay there for a few minutes, staring at the ceiling, trying to summon the energy to get up. But the thought of facing another day, of seeing Lisa again, was almost too much to bear. Eventually, I forced myself out of bed, stumbling into the bathroom to splash cold water on my face. I looked at myself in the mirror, and for a moment, I didn't recognize the man staring back at me. My eyes were bloodshot, my face pale, lines of stress etched deep into my skin. I looked like a man who had lost everything, and in a way, I had. I went downstairs, hoping to avoid Lisa, but of course, she was there, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. She looked up when I entered, her expression guarded, as if she wasn't sure how to approach me. I didn't say anything, just grabbed a cup and poured myself some coffee, trying to keep my hands from shaking. We sat there in silence, the tension between us thick and suffocating. I couldn't bring myself to look at her, couldn't bring myself to say anything. I didn't trust myself to speak without breaking down, without letting all the pain and anger come spilling out. Finally, Lisa spoke, her voice quiet, tentative. "John. I'm sorry." I looked up at her, my heart aching at the sight of her face, the face I had loved for so many years, the face that had now become a stranger's. "Sorry?" I echoed, my voice hollow. "Sorry for what, Lisa? For cheating? For lying? For throwing away our marriage?" She flinched at my words, her eyes filling with tears. "I didn't mean for it to happen this way," she whispered. "I never wanted to hurt you." "But you did," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. "You hurt me more than I ever thought possible." She wiped away a tear, her shoulders shaking. I know I did. And I don't expect you to forgive me. But I need you to know that I never stopped caring about you. I never stopped loving you." "Loving me?" I repeated, bitterness seeping into my voice. "If this is what love looks like, then I don't want any part of it." She looked down, her tears falling silently onto the table. "I'm sorry," she said again, but the words felt empty, meaningless. I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I need some time, Lisa. I need to figure out what the hell I'm going to do." She nodded, not looking up. "I understand." I turned and walked out of the kitchen, my heart heavy, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. I knew I couldn't stay in that house, couldn't stay around her. I needed space, time to think, to process everything that had happened. But as I walked out the door, a part of me wondered if I would ever be able to come back. If I would ever be able to forgive her, or myself. The days that followed were some of the hardest I've ever lived through. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, and every time I closed my eyes, all I saw was Lisa and Tom, tangled up in that hotel bed. I stayed away from the house as much as I could, throwing myself into work, trying to drown out the pain with the steady hum of business. But even that was hollow. Nothing could distract me from the emptiness gnawing at my insides. I spent a lot of time driving aimlessly, not really caring where I ended up. Sometimes I'd park by the beach and just sit there, staring out at the waves, trying to make sense of everything. How had we gone from a happy, loving couple to this? Was it really all my fault, or had Lisa just been looking for an excuse to walk away? I tortured myself with these questions, but there were no answers, only more pain. And then, just as I was beginning to think there was no way forward, Lisa threw me a curveball I never saw coming. It was a Tuesday evening, about a week after the confrontation. I had been staying at a cheap motel, unable to bear being in the same house as her, when she called me out of the blue. Her voice was calm, almost too calm, and it immediately put me on edge. "John, can we talk?" she asked, and I could tell from her tone that something was up. "Talk about what, Lisa?" I replied, trying to keep the weariness out of my voice. "I don't think there's much left to say." "Please, just hear me out," she said, and there was a hint of desperation in her voice that caught me off guard. "It's important." Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a small park near the house, a place we used to go with the kids when they were little. It felt strange, meeting her there, like we were two strangers on some awkward first date. She was already sitting on one of the benches when I arrived, looking out over the pond with a distant expression. For a moment, I hesitated, wondering if I should just turn around and leave. But something in her posture, in the way she was clutching her hands together, made me stay. I sat down next to her, leaving a noticeable gap between us. She glanced at me briefly, then looked away, her eyes red-rimmed like she'd been crying. "Thanks for coming," she said quietly. "What do you want, Lisa?" I asked, cutting straight to the point. I didn't have the energy for small talk. She took a deep breath, as if steeling herself. "John, I've been doing a lot of thinking, about everything. About us." "Yeah?" I replied, not sure where this was going. "And? Anne. I don't want to lose you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you in ways I can't even begin to understand. But I've realized something this past week. I don't want to throw away what we have. I want to try and make things right." I stared at her, stunned. This was the last thing I expected to hear. After everything that had happened, after all the pain and betrayal, now she wanted to make things right? "I don't know if that's possible, Lisa," I said slowly, trying to process her words. "You can't just undo what you did. You can't just go back." "I know," she said quickly, tears starting to well up in her eyes again. "I know it's not that simple. But I don't want to give up on us. I want to try. Please, John, can we at least try?" I didn't know what to say. A part of me wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all. After everything she had put me through, now she was asking for another chance. But there was another part of me, a small, broken part, that wanted to believe her. That wanted to hold on to the hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. "Why now, Lisa?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. "Why the sudden change of heart?" She looked down at her hands, twisting them in her lap. "Because I realized something," she said softly. "I realized that what I did, it wasn't about you. It was about me. My own insecurities, my own fears. I was looking for something to fill the emptiness I felt inside, and I made a horrible, selfish mistake. But I see that now. And I want to fix it. I want to fix us." Her words hung in the air between us, heavy with emotion. I wanted to believe her, to believe that she was sincere. But there was something in her eyes, something cold and calculating, that made me hesitate. "Are you sure this isn't just because things didn't work out with him?" I asked, my voice hardening. "Because if you're only coming back to me because your fling didn't turn out the way you hoped, then—" "No," she interrupted, shaking her head fiercely. "It's not like that, John. I swear. I ended things with him. I realized that it was a mistake, that it wasn't what I really wanted. What I want is you. Us. I want to fix our marriage." Her words should have brought me some sense of relief, some small comfort. But instead, they filled me with doubt. I watched her closely, searching her face for any sign of deception, any hint that she was just trying to save herself from being alone. But all I saw was desperation, a desperate plea for another chance. "John, please," she said again, her voice breaking. "I don't want to lose you. I know I don't deserve it, but, can we try? Can we at least try to fix this?" I felt my heart clench, torn between the love I still felt for her and the overwhelming sense of betrayal that lingered like a dark cloud over my thoughts. Could we really fix this? Could I ever trust her again, knowing what she had done? But as I looked at her, so fragile and broken, I realized that I didn't have an answer. Not yet, anyway. Maybe we could try. Maybe we couldn't. But I knew one thing for sure, I needed time. Time to figure out if I could ever forgive her, if I could ever move past the pain. I don't know, Lisa, I said finally, my voice heavy with uncertainty. "I don't know if we can fix this. But, maybe we can try." Her eyes filled with hope, and she reached out to take my hand. For a moment, I almost pulled away, but then I let her fingers wrap around mine, the touch familiar yet foreign. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "Thank you, John. I promise I'll do whatever it takes. I'll make this right." But as we sat there, our hands entwined, a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end of our troubles. It felt too sudden, too convenient. And as much as I wanted to believe her, to believe in us, I couldn't help but wonder if this was just another mistake waiting to happen. The days that followed were tense, filled with awkward silences and tentative attempts at normalcy. Lisa moved back into our bedroom, but it didn't feel right. There was an invisible wall between us, a cold barrier built out of everything that had happened. I slept on the very edge of the bed, not daring to reach out, unsure if I even wanted to. Lisa seemed to sense it too. She would lie there quietly, trying not to move too much, her breathing shallow, as if afraid that even the slightest noise might break the fragile peace we were pretending existed. She tried hard to show she was committed to fixing things. She cooked my favorite meals, suggested we go on long walks together like we used to, brought up old stories and memories to remind me of better times. But no matter what she did, it all felt forced, as if she was putting on a performance, trying to convince me, or maybe herself, that we could go back to how things were. But we couldn't. At least, I couldn't. Not after what I had seen, what I had heard. Every time I looked at her, I couldn't stop my mind from drifting back to that hotel room, to the way she had smiled at him, the way she had looked at him with such raw desire. It was like a knife twisting deeper into a wound that refused to heal. One evening, a few days after our talk at the park, we sat down to dinner. Lisa had made a point to cook one of my favorite dishes, roast chicken, the way her mother used to make it. I stared at the plate, unable to eat. The smell made my stomach turn. I pushed the food around, my appetite gone, my mind elsewhere. Lisa watched me, her eyes filled with worry. "John," she began carefully, her voice soft, "I know this isn't easy. I know I hurt you, but I really am trying. Can't we just move past this? Start fresh?" I looked up at her, feeling a wave of frustration rise in my chest. "Start fresh?" I repeated, my voice sharper than I intended. "How do you suggest we do that, Lisa? How do you start fresh after 20 years and a betrayal like this?" She winced, but didn't back down. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice wavering. "But I'm willing to try, John. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right." I put my fork down, rubbing my temples as the tension built up. "And what if I'm not?" I asked, my voice low but firm. "What if I'm not willing to pretend like nothing happened?" Her face fell, her eyes filling with tears. "John, please. I don't want to lose you. I know I made a mistake, but I've learned from it. I'm scared of being alone, scared of losing everything we've built together." There it was. The truth, finally. The real reason behind her sudden change of heart. She wasn't afraid of losing me, she was afraid of being alone, of facing the consequences of her choices. I felt a bitter laugh bubbling up inside me. I leaned back in my chair, my voice colder than I intended. "So, that's what this is about, huh? You're afraid of being alone?" She shook her head quickly, wiping away the tears streaming down her face. "No, John, it's not just that. I love you. I do. I want to be with you." I looked at her, and for the first time, I realized that I didn't believe her. Not anymore. Maybe she thought she loved me, maybe she even believed it herself. But I could see the fear in her eyes, fear of losing her safety net, of being out there in the world on her own. "Lisa," I said quietly, my voice steady, "I don't think I can do this anymore. I've thought about it, I've tried to make sense of it, but I just can't. I can't go back to how things were." She stared at me, her face crumbling. "John, no, please. Don't say that. Don't give up on us." I shook my head slowly. "I'm not giving up, Lisa. I'm just letting go. I can't live with this shadow hanging over us. I can't keep wondering every day if you're still thinking about him, if you're still tempted to go back to that life. I deserve better than that. And so do you. Tears rolled down her cheeks, and she reached across the table to take my hand. But, we can fix this, she pleaded. We can see a therapist, we can try, John. Please, just give us a chance. I pulled my hand away gently, feeling a deep, painful calm settle over me. I've already given us 20 years, Lisa. I've given you everything I had. I don't have anything left to give. She sobbed quietly, her body shaking. I'm begging you, John. Don't do this. Don't walk away from us. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the floor. I'm not walking away from us, Lisa. I'm walking away from the woman who betrayed me. The woman who chose someone else over our marriage. I'm walking away from a life that no longer makes sense. She looked at me, her face a mask of grief and desperation. So, what are you saying? She whispered. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my decision settle over me. I'm saying I want a divorce, Lisa. I want to start over, to find a new path, a new life. Without you. Her face went pale, and she shook her head, her voice breaking. No, John, please. Don't do this. I'll change, I'll do anything, just don't leave me. I felt a pang of guilt, a flicker of doubt, but I pushed it away. I'm sorry, Lisa. I really am. But I can't do this anymore. I can't pretend. We're done. She collapsed into sobs, her body trembling, and I felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. I didn't want to hurt her, but I knew this was the only way forward. I had to let go. I had to move on. I'll have the papers drawn up, I said softly, trying to keep my voice steady. You can stay in the house until you figure things out. Lisa didn't respond, her sobs growing louder, and I turned away, walking out of the kitchen, out of the house, out of the life we had built together. I felt the cool evening air hit my face, and I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. For the first time in days, I felt a sense of peace, a sense of clarity. I knew I had made the right decision. I knew I deserved better. And now, it was time to find out what that meant. The days after I told Lisa I wanted a divorce felt like a strange mixture of liberation and grief. On one hand, I was relieved to have made a decision, to have taken a step toward reclaiming my life, my dignity. But on the other, I felt an overwhelming sense of loss. 20 years is a long time, and no matter how much I tried to focus on the future, the past lingered like a shadow I couldn't quite shake. I moved out of the house the next day. I found a small apartment on the other side of town, nothing fancy, just a place to start over. It felt strange, being alone in that empty space, surrounded by unfamiliar walls. At night, I would lie in bed, staring up at the ceiling, and the quiet would feel almost unbearable. But I knew this was what I needed. I needed time to heal, to figure out who I was without her, without the life I had known for so long. I threw myself into my work, spending long hours at the office, taking on new projects, anything to keep my mind occupied. My colleagues noticed the change in me, the new intensity, but no one said anything. They just gave me space, offering a sympathetic nod here, a quiet pat on the shoulder there. I appreciated it, even though I didn't really want to talk about it. I didn't know how to talk about it, how to put into words the mix of pain and relief, of anger and sadness. A few weeks later, I met with the lawyer to start the divorce proceedings. Lisa didn't fight it. I think she knew there was no point. She had tried calling me a few times, leaving messages saying she was sorry, that she still loved me, that she wanted to work things out. But I couldn't bring myself to respond. Every time I heard her voice, it felt like ripping open a wound that was just beginning to close. I had to let go. I had to move on. The divorce went through smoothly. We agreed to split our assets fairly, and I let her keep the house. I didn't want it anymore, it was filled with too many memories, too many ghosts. Lisa seemed almost numb through the whole process, like she was watching her life slip away and didn't know how to stop it. but there was a coldness in her eyes that told me she understood this was the end. After the papers were signed, I felt a strange sense of finality, like a heavy weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I walked out of the lawyer's office, feeling the cool breeze on my face, and for the first time in a long time, I felt free. I knew there would be hard days ahead, days when the loneliness would feel like too much to bear, but I also knew that I had made the right choice. I had to learn to be okay on my own, to rebuild myself from the ground up. I started going to therapy, something I had never done before. At first, it felt awkward, sitting in a room with a stranger, talking about my feelings. But gradually, it helped. I began to understand that Lisa's betrayal wasn't about me, that it wasn't a reflection of my worth or my value. It was her choice, her mistake, and I couldn't carry the weight of it anymore. I had to let it go, to forgive her, not for her sake but for mine. I began taking care of myself in ways I hadn't in years. I started going to the gym, not to punish myself but to feel stronger, more in control. I picked up old hobbies I'd abandoned long ago, like painting and playing the guitar. I even started taking cooking classes, something I'd always wanted to do but never found the time for. Little by little, I started to feel like myself again, like I was rediscovering who I was outside of my marriage, outside of the pain. One day, a few months after the divorce, I ran into an old friend at a coffee shop. We got to talking, and she invited me to join her and some friends for dinner. I hesitated at first, but then I thought, why not? It was time to start saying yes to life again, to open myself up to new experiences, new people. The dinner was a turning point. I laughed, genuinely laughed, for the first time in months. I realized that I could still connect with people, still find joy in the small moments, still feel alive. It wasn't easy, and there were still days when the loneliness crept in, but I knew I was on the right path. I never heard from Lisa again after the divorce was finalized. I don't know where she went or what she did, and honestly, I don't care. I wish her well, I truly do, but she is no longer a part of my story. I'm writing a new one now, one where I'm the main character, where I get to decide my own happiness. And that's what this journey has taught me, that sometimes, the hardest choices are the ones that set you free. Sometimes, you have to let go of the life you thought you wanted to find the life you were meant for. I don't know what the future holds, and that's okay. For the first time in a long time, I'm excited about it. I'm excited to find out who I am, what I'm capable of, and what new adventures are waiting just around the corner. Because sometimes, when everything falls apart, it's just a chance to rebuild something better. Something stronger. Something true. And that's exactly what I intend to do.